murderous masterminds. Brilliant, wicked, conniving.
It wasn't just a happenstance, haphazard murder spree of a year. It was 50 weeks of planned killing.
They are driven by revenge, dogma, and ego.
My name is Ted Lundy, and I'm the defendant in the case, and I'm just here to introduce myself.
Their common trait, exceptional intelligence. What transformed such gifted men into some of the most brutal killers? And which of them is most evil? A scale exists to measure the darkest corners of human behavior. It weighs the criminal mind and the crime. From impulsive murderers to serial killers, this 22-point scale attempts to determine who are the most evil among us. Malicious masterminds. They are among the most devious and twisted of killers. Their intellectual acumen is their greatest weapon. It enables them to plot elaborate crimes and elude capture. In California, Edmund Kemper was imprisoned for killing his grandparents in 1964. He tricked the system into releasing him early, then launched into a year-long killing spree. 19th century Chicago. Dr. H.H. Holmes slaughtered victims in his hotel and then sold their body parts. For him, murder was thrilling and profitable. 1977, Ted Kaczynski disappeared into the wilderness to plan an elaborate series of attacks. He terrorized the US for nearly 20 years. In each case, the murders were gruesome, vicious, and evil. But no two evil acts are the same. The 22-point scale is a tool to quantify murderers and their crimes. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Stone of Columbia University in New York created the scale. Dr. Stone explores the killers' histories to understand what motivates them.
Serial killers in general are cunning. They must strategize, plot, and scheme to execute their plans. But those who most successfully carry out their murders are exceptionally clever and smart. These killers usually occupy the higher levels on the scale of evil.
Edmund Kemper was one of these mastermind killers.
We're talking about a cold, hard murder, and mayhem and assault and robbery and rape.
Northern California, 1972. The morning before Easter Sunday, Edmund Kemper made his bed, washed up, and left the house. The home was tidy. Still, it seemed like an unremarkable day, but for Kemper it was momentous. He had just realized his childhood dream of killing his mother. After she had drawn her last breath, he whispered to himself, "Poetic justice." She was one of Kemper's 10 victims.
Kemper is among the most gruesome serial killers. This towering 6'9" man slaughtered, butchered, even devoured his victims. He delighted in killing, and due to his intelligence, his crimes went long unnoticed.
What compelled him to kill his own mother? And how did his intelligence and skillful deceit fuel his killing rampage? To understand the roots of Kemper's sadism, Dr. Stone examined his past. He uncovered nightmarish details. Kemper was raised in a tumultuous household. His parents separated when he was 4. He and his two sisters stayed with their mother, who was embittered by the split. She berated young Kemper and even locked him in the cellar for months at a time. There, Kemper created fantasies. He imagined killing his mother, her friends, his teacher. The isolation seemed to engender hate within him. He took out his anger on his sister's dolls, cutting off their heads and limbs. This childhood aggression foreshadowed Edmund Kemper's later crimes. Edmund Kemper had the misfortune of spending his childhood in a dysfunctional and abusive household. His parents' marriage disintegrated when he was a young child, and his mother remained bitter about the breakup. She often took it out on her only son, belittling him and locking him in the cellar for long periods.
His mother is the defining figure in Kemper's childhood. The rage that she feels for her husband is directed onto her son. The oppression Kemper experiences slowly builds to anger within him.
As a teenager, Kemper lived between his mother's and his grandparents' homes. His grandparents made him feel like a burden and unwanted. In August of 1964, in a fit of rage, he shot and killed them. He was sent to a mental institution for adult prisoners, though only 15 years old. While there, he mastered skills in deception. He also scored 136 on IQ tests, of superior intelligence, one doctor noted. Surrounded by psychopaths, he spent his days learning about their crimes. He also befriended the psychologists who were treating him and earned a job as a research aide administering psychological tests to other inmates. Kemper memorized 22 of the tests. Not surprisingly, he scored high marks when he himself was tested and won praise from the psychologists. He was released early, in 1969.
Kemper uses his intelligence to trick the authorities. This makes brilliant killers among the most dangerous criminals. They have foresight and the capacity to outsmart not only their victims, but also their captors. To do so, they are extremely calculating and scheming. They carry out their crimes with absolute precision. And when put in an environment that triggers their rage, they are merciless.
When released, Kemper, then 20 years old, was sent back to live with his mother.
But I was put right back in the pressure cooker that I was hatched out of. It was a very sick and very depressive and very unhealthy relationship.
His mother continued to taunt Kemper, telling him he was a failure like his father. Each time they argued, he would storm out of the house and drive about aimlessly. He would sometimes pass young female hitchhikers. He began to pick them up, enjoying their company and their vulnerability. Kemper's first victims were two female university students. He picked them up, then shot and killed them in his car. He took the bodies home and dismembered them, just as he had done to his sister's dolls. He saved some of the body parts in the refrigerator as trophies, and even cannibalized some of them. The rest he discarded along the California coast. He eventually killed and mutilated 6 young women. Each murder he later described as a fantasy come to life. The police had no idea who the killer might be.
It wasn't just a happenstance, haphazard murder spree of a year. It was 50 weeks of planned killing.
With each murder, he became more excited, more empowered, and more charged to kill again, and more savagely each time.
Kemper's rage drove him to kill university girls, but in the end he directed his anger towards the source of his rage, his mother. On the Saturday before Easter, he bludgeoned and decapitated her in her bedroom. He then invited a friend of his mother's over and killed her. The next day, he turned himself in.
During Kemper's childhood, his mother was an abusive presence. As he got older, he channeled his aggression into murder. Targeting female hitchhikers, in a sense, was like killing his mother over and over again. Ultimately, killing his mother was his form of retribution, closure.
Edmund Kemper was given 7 consecutive life sentences. Dr. Stone places him on the scale.
Because of the serial nature of his crimes and the sadistic pleasure Edmund Kemper experienced, I would place him on level 22 of my scale. This is the highest category, a place for torture murderers whose crimes involve butchery and sexual assault. He is undeniably one of the most evil killers still alive.
How could Kemper kill with his bare hands? Is there something fundamentally different about him that makes him a cold-blooded killer? Some researchers are investigating the biology of human empathy. It starts with what are called mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when an action is performed and when the same action is observed.
What mirror neurons do is to really be the building block of social behavior in our brain.
Marco Iacoboni of the University of California at Los Angeles studies mirror neurons and the role they play in learning empathy. He believes that mirror neurons tell the brain how to read and feel emotions. People without these mirror cells cannot empathize with others. They cannot see pain being felt by another person. To test his hypothesis, Iacoboni had research subjects undergo functional MRI scans as they observed and responded to emotional cues. They were shown pictures of people expressing happiness or anger. First, they were told to simply observe the images. Then they were asked to mimic the emotions. The results were intriguing. The brain scans showed that mirror cells communicate between 2 parts of the brain, connecting an action to a feeling. Brain activity starts in the region responsible for muscle movement. The mirror cells instruct the brain to literally mirror the observed action. The cells then send an impulse to the brain's emotional centers, connecting an emotion to that action. Thus, when normal people see a smile, they experience happiness. These are the building blocks of empathy.
When I feel certain emotions, I express those emotions with my own body, with my own face.
Iacoboni validated his theory by testing unlikely subjects. Autistic patients who generally lack the ability to empathize.
And I want you to point to the face that shows how she's feeling in the picture. Show me angry.
Autistics know how to describe emotions.
Angry. Embarrassed.
But many have difficulty feeling or expressing them.
Show me joy.
Functional MRI scans of the autistic subjects showed very little activation of mirror neurons. The more severe the autism, the less activity in the mirror neuron system. There's no correlation between autism and violence, but Iacoboni believes that a detachment between mirror neurons and the emotional centers of the brain may block feelings of empathy and provides a key to explaining violence.
We believe that violent behavior could be triggered by some form of disconnect between mirror neurons and emotional brain centers.
Lack of empathy is a starting point to understanding mastermind killers like Edmund Kemper. Murderers who, despite being intelligent and accomplished, show no regard for their victims. One of the most chilling of these mastermind killers was Ted Bundy.
My name is Ted Bundy, and I'm the defendant in the case, and I'm just here to introduce myself.
Bundy brutally murdered at least 35 young women across the United States in the 1970s. His violent streak began when he was an undergraduate at the University of Washington. After a girlfriend dumped him, he sought revenge on women, gaining their confidence by posing as a police officer, fireman, or businessman. He would then rape, bludgeon, and strangle them.
Ted Bundy was an expert imposter because he was extremely attractive and persuasive. He knew how to take advantage of his good looks and charm.
This was also evident during his trial. Bundy defended himself. He impressed even the judge.
You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Bundy was sentenced to death and was electrocuted in 1989. Some killers are so clever, so devious, that they are never found. One of the most notorious of these was the Zodiac Killer. In 1969, he terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area of California.
He's an absolutely ruthless, completely merciless killer.
He is known to have murdered 5 people and remains a suspect in at least a dozen other unsolved attacks. Most of his victims were young couples. He taunted the police and left clues in letters he sent to the press. His letters included 4 cryptograms in which he used 360 symbols. He said these ciphers would reveal his identity, if anyone could crack them. But investigators could decipher only one of the 4 cryptograms. The Zodiac Killer has never been apprehended. His notoriety continues, and his identity remains unknown.
Though not identified definitively in his lifetime, Arthur Lee Allen, whose IQ was 136, was suspected of being San Francisco's Zodiac Killer. From evidence gathered after his death, his guilt is now a near certainty. His ability to evade capture and kill ruthlessly places him among the most evil masterminds.
There are masterminds who thrive on the mental challenge of executing the perfect crime. 2 such were Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, wealthy university friends of extraordinary intelligence. Chicago, 1924. Bored with their privileged lives, Leopold and Loeb hatched a plan to kidnap and kill an acquaintance. Money wasn't their objective. Their aim was to get away with an elaborate crime. They picked up a 14-year-old boy, Bobby Franks, a neighbor, bludgeoned him to death, poured acid on his body, and burned his clothes. Then they dumped his body near a railway line and sent a letter to the boy's parents demanding $10,000. The pair delighted in reading about their crime. Virtually everything had been perfectly orchestrated, but they had made one mistake. Leopold's glasses had accidentally fallen out of his pocket at the crime scene. Police found the glasses near the body, leading to the arrest of the killers. During the trial, a prosecutor described the crime as so meticulously carried out that there would have been no arrest, no hearing, had the glasses not fallen out. Leopold and Loeb were found guilty and given life sentences. While they were intelligent assailants, they were novice killers, and not in the league of another Chicago murderer who had preceded them by decades. H. Holmes, a 19th century physician, was one of the most prolific and cold-blooded masterminds of all time. For him, murder was not only a thrill, it was lucrative. In 1893, the Chicago World's Fair was in full swing. Visitors from around the country had descended on the Windy City. Many stayed at Dr. Harry Howard Holmes's Grand Hotel. It was 3 stories high, stretched an entire block, and was known as the Castle. But behind its walls, it was a death trap. Scores of people disappeared after entering the hotel. Their fate is the stuff of blood-curdling nightmares.
Holmes possesses every trait of evil. He basked in dismembering, mutilating, and abusing his victims.
Holmes's one-man murder spree would go on for 2 years. H. Holmes was a 19th century doctor whose intelligence was his greatest weapon. What transformed this successful physician into one of the most vicious murderers in American history? His story begins with a troubled childhood. He was born in 1861 and grew up in isolation. Death fascinated him. His mother was a zealous Methodist. She read the Bible to him almost every day, instilling in him extreme ideas of good and evil. His father was an abusive alcoholic. The boy tried to escape by immersing himself in his studies and collecting macabre souvenirs.
As a child, he was a loner. He finds refuge in his astounding intellect. He is an exceptional student, but somehow his mind gravitates toward all things grisly and morbid.
At the age of 16, Holmes graduated from school. Soon afterwards, he entered medical school, where he showed extraordinary skill in dissection. He also managed to make money from the school's cadavers. He took out life insurance on fictitious people, named himself the beneficiary, and presented the cadavers as the deceased. Over the next 17 years, his crimes escalated to murder. By 1893, Holmes had made something of a name for himself in the booming city of Chicago. He was a successful young doctor and owned a large building that housed a chemist, other shops, and a 71-room hotel. Neighbors called him the land-rich physician. But some of the building's workers and hotel guests began to disappear. As many as 50 travelers went missing after checking into his hotel. Holmes was gassing them in their rooms. He then sent the bodies to the cellar through a secret chute. In the pit of this house of horrors, Holmes engaged in repulsive acts. He beat and sexually assaulted his female victims. Then, applying his surgical skills, he sliced up the bodies. He disposed of body parts in vats of acid or a furnace. Sometimes he polished and assembled the bones into skeletal models, which he sold to medical schools.
Holmes possesses every trait of evil. he basked in dismembering, mutilating, and abusing his victims.
Fortune was Holmes's primary motive. He not only sold skeletal models, but continued his insurance scams, using his victims' bodies instead of medical school cadavers. But as the World's Fair began to wind down, people became suspicious of the activities at his hotel. Holmes fled Chicago. He traveled around the US, committing more frauds and murders. A Pinkerton investigator, hired by one of the insurance companies, tracked him down and had him arrested. As the investigator dug deeper into Holmes's activities, he discovered the killings. Holmes was convicted of the murder of an associate whose body he had tried to use in one of the insurance scams. He later admitted to 27 killings, though some estimate he murdered as many as 200 people. In 1896, H.H. Holmes was put to death by hanging.
Holmes went to great lengths to kill. He constructed a monstrous house of death. He successfully pulled off his crimes by manipulating the public's trust and by drawing out the murderers. He was deceptive, depraved, indeed the consummate torture murderer. For these reasons, I put Holmes at number 22, the highest level of the scale, and where Edmund Kemper stands. Because Holmes killed more victims and tortured them more prolongedly, he even outdoes Kemper in depravity.
Of all the mastermind killers, perhaps the most clever was Ted Kaczynski. He was also among the most elusive serial killers of the 20th century. Once a child prodigy, as an adult, Kaczynski used his extraordinary intelligence to terrorize Americans for nearly 2 decades. He was the country's most wanted and feared killer, known simply as the Unabomber. Living secretly in a 3 by 4 meter wood cabin, the Unabomber spent his waking hours obsessed with a violent plot to remake the world through the use of terrorism. In 1978, he began sending parcel bombs to people whose beliefs he found offensive. This former mathematics instructor at the University of California ultimately killed 3 people and maimed 24 more. For 18 years, Kaczynski baffled the authorities. His crimes yielded no evidence, nor any clues as to his identity. The Unabomber was as elusive as a ghost.
The Unabomber case was probably one of the longest and most terrifying mysteries in the U.S. How Ted Kaczynski got away with murder for nearly 2 decades points to an extraordinary mind.
To understand the roots of Kaczynski's violence, Dr. Stone examined his childhood and uncovered disturbing details. Chicago, 1942. 9-month-old Ted Kaczynski was admitted to hospital with a severe skin rash. Doctors strapped him to the bed to prevent him from touching the sores. For a month, the baby lay in isolation, barred from human contact. According to his mother, young Ted was never the same. He became shy, awkward, listless.
Socialization begins at birth through human contact. Isolation at such an early age can be emotionally destructive. Far more likely, however, is the fact of his having been born with genetic tendency to paranoid schizophrenia.
It soon became evident that young Ted possessed exceptional intelligence. At the age of 10, Kaczynski scored 170 on an IQ test. Genius level supposedly began at 140, although the test is no longer used in American schools. He was academically precocious and immersed himself in his studies, but something was amiss. Kaczynski was withdrawn. He spent much of his time alone and showed aggression towards his peers. In 1958, 16-year-old Ted Kaczynski enrolled at Harvard University. While there, Kaczynski volunteered to be a subject in a dubious psychological experiment. Brilliant yet reclusive outcasts were the recruits of choice for the project. The subjects were given code names. Kaczynski's was Lawful. Participants were told to write down their world philosophy, their personal manifesto. Their views were then openly challenged. The goal was to test their emotional strength. Heart and breathing rates were measured. Kaczynski responded wildly, brimming with fury. The study lasted for 3 years.
This continual tormenting at such an impressionable age could have affected Kaczynski, building long-term hostility that would find an outlet later in life. Perhaps these experiences and his genius mind put him on a path of evil.
Some research shows that highly intelligent brains grow differently to normal brains, and that negative events can have more lasting effects.
We know that in some people who have a very high IQ, there's a cost associated with this high mental functioning.
Dr. Paul Thompson is a neurologist at the University of California at Los Angeles. He maps the growing brain and explores how high intelligence may affect behavior. One study scanned the brains of high and average intelligence subjects every year for several years.
So basically what we do is we take a snapshot of how the brain looks every year, and then we kind of compile these into a movie.
During the first 3 years of life, a normal brain has billions of cells making 1 million new neural connections every day. The brains of extremely intelligent youngsters have even more brain cells. Their brains are more active and make even more neural connections. Dr. Thompson's results show a remarkable pattern. Highly intelligent brains need an average of 2 extra years to make and organize neural connections and to mature.
This is a really surprising finding. You might think that smart children, everything happens sooner. Their brain grows faster, grows earlier.
Does this difference in brain development affect behavior? Can traumatic events have a greater impact on the slow-to-mature brains of the highly intelligent?
There's some evidence that at the very high end of IQ, they may become socially withdrawn, they may not take the time to focus on other emotional areas of development, and we think that an extreme focus on intellectual pursuits might be detrimental.
It's not likely that this different growth rate makes a brilliant mind more vulnerable to violence, but studies have shown that negative childhood experiences can destroy brain cells and impair emotional development. Thompson has demonstrated this by tracking brain maturation through early adulthood. He has discovered that from birth to 20, the developing brain is very impressionable.
So any experiences that you have during that time are critical for the future development of the brain in adulthood.
Could Ted Kaczynski's early childhood and late teenage traumas have led to his violent impulses? Kaczynski graduated from Harvard in 1962. He might have become an accomplished mathematician. Instead, his genius helped him become one of America's most renowned terrorists, the Unabomber. After Harvard, Kaczynski earned a PhD and landed a plum teaching position at the University of California at Berkeley. But 2 years later he resigned and retreated to a solitary life in the Montana wilderness. He would soon put into motion his violent plan to eradicate modern technology, which he believed was destroying humanity. In 1978, he sent his first parcel bomb to the science department at the University of Chicago. Over the next 9 years, bombs arrived at other universities and businesses. 24 victims were wounded and disfigured. Each time the explosives were more powerful and deadlier, but they contained not a shred of evidence. Kaczynski took extreme measures to hide his crimes. He lined his shoes with a smaller sole so that his footprints could not be identified. The bombs were made from stolen and homemade materials, all untraceable. And he recorded his every move in code, so they'd make no sense if discovered. Then, in 1987, the Unabomber seemed to disappear.
His master plan was grand. It required someone of superior intelligence and made him an unpredictable killer.
The Unabomber's inactivity raised concerns for investigators.
His period of silence made it worrisome because it's waiting for the other shoe to drop. He may take a recess from his bombing activities to reevaluate, to improve on his devices.
Dave Weber was part of the task force chasing the Unabomber. After years on the investigation, officials were struggling for answers.
In the early days, there were no clues to tie the bombings together whatsoever.
After the first letter bomb in 1978, another had turned up a year later at Northwestern University, also in Chicago. Then another one detonated inside an aeroplane. There were injuries, but no deaths. In 1985, the Unabomber claimed his first murder, a California computer store owner. More than 15 other victims were wounded and disfigured. Seemingly random targets, no apparent motive, and no clues. Kaczynski was covering his tracks meticulously.
He made his own pipes. He knew that pipe material might be traced, so he would make his own lead pipes, wrap it with tape.
Kaczynski collected strands of hair from public washrooms and planted them in bombs to mislead investigators.
Kaczynski had a mind of a chess master. He was always thinking steps ahead to outpace and confuse investigators. He was dogged and willing to go to great lengths to perfect his plans.
Despite the harsh Montana terrain, Kaczynski traveled far and wide to gather bomb parts. Living off the land and in deep seclusion, he survived on $300 a year. Periodically, he would ask his family for money so he could travel to other cities to post the parcel bombs. His extreme measures succeeded in keeping the authorities at bay. Eventually, Ted Kaczynski was caught, but not by any of the scores of police, FBI agents, and investigators who were doggedly hunting him. For almost 18 years, the Unabomber eluded the police and FBI agents who were tracking him. His bombs were so cleverly designed, his attacks so seemingly random, that the authorities were at an almost total loss. They did, however, discover one connection among the bombs.
The triggering device was so unique, it wasn't known to any of the bomb technicians nationwide.
Eventually, a few other links between the bombings began to emerge. Each package had been posted with stamps depicting the playwright Eugene O'Neill, whose works touched on the theme of revenge. Detectives also noticed a Wood-related theme. One victim's last name was Wood. Another lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And one of the victims worked for a forestry group. They also noted that each bomb was encased in a wooden box. Desperate for leads, investigators looked into every possible wood-related industry.
It seems rather broad to look at it, but first of all you have to look at the sources of the wood, and then from those sources you look at the customer base. The wood leads are so immense, it's almost like counting stars.
Unfortunately, their efforts sent them down more dead ends.
These false leads were clearly tricks, games to throw off investigators. They were signs of a highly intelligent, clever mind.
But what Ted Kaczynski was creating in secrecy would eventually lead to his capture. During the Unabomber's hiatus from 1987 to 1993, Kaczynski was drafting a personal manifesto for the world to see and to define who he was. It was a 65-page proclamation that called for the destruction of modern life. It began, "The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race." Kaczynski criticized scientists, those who covet power, and those who fight passively.
His manifesto, ironically, damns the very kind of people who he is. Kaczynski himself was a scientist, and he craved power. Ostracized all his life, he was angry with the world that didn't accept him. He clearly found power by being the Unabomber. By plotting mail bomb schemes, he kills from afar, passively, an approach he condemns in the manifesto.
In 1996, investigators finally got their big break. A man came forward who was convinced that the Unabomber was his brother. After a month-long stakeout in Montana, Ted Kaczynski was arrested. Officials were shocked by the appearance of the man they had apprehended. He was gaunt, filthy, and wild-looking. But unlike his appearance, Kaczynski's cabin was clean and organized and packed with books, bombing materials, and weapons. It took the FBI 12 days to inventory the cabin's contents.
A search of his cabin uncovers a mad genius mind. Among serial killers, Ted Kaczynski is unique, killing not for sadistic pleasure, but for a philosophical cause. His manifesto shows a brilliant but pathological mind. To many, an evil genius.
Kaczynski was charged with killing 3 people and injuring 11. He pleaded guilty to all counts and was sentenced to life without parole. Dr. Stone places him on the scale of evil.
Because of his systematic planning of brutal but detached murders, I would place him on level 16. A place reserved for psychopaths committing multiple vicious acts. But unlike Kemper and Holmes, he killed from afar. He never faced down his victims. Therefore, he lands lower on the scale of evil.
Malicious masterminds. They seem to outmaneuver everyone. They get away with numerous murders. Their killing often goes on for years. They are hard to identify, conceal their intentions, and frequently strike when least expected. These traits make them perhaps the most dangerous of murderers. As Dr. Stone continues his investigation of these ingenious killers, he helps us understand why brilliance turns to murder, and which of them is most evil.